For decades, humans have been in the galaxy, peaceful, helpful, and curiously quiet. They've sent scientists, diplomats, engineers, but never a single warship. Not one. So when a Terran ship finally arrives in orbit, massive, silent, and unlike anything ever built, the galaxy freezes and realizes they never asked the most important question. What have the humans been building in silence? The galaxy was never a gentle place. Even at its most civilized, it was a sprawl of tension and teeth. Species with claws, empires with fleets, and borders protected not by treaties, but by fear. Every race that earned a seat at the table brought something to defend it. Power, force, fire. It was simply the way things were. To exist here was to be armed. To be respected was to be dangerous. So when the humans arrived, curious, cooperative, and entirely unarmed, the galaxy took notice. Not an alarm, an amusement. They brought no warships, no defense grids, no planetary security fleets. Instead, they offered scientists, engineers, translators. They asked questions before offering answers, observed before acting, smiled more than most. And they fit into the galaxy like an echo, quiet, present, but never dominant. They opened embassies, shared medical advancements, sent aid to disaster zones where other powers sent soldiers. When pirates attacked a border world, humans responded with logistics and food, not guns. They built things. They fixed things. But they never sent a single warship. Not one. And in a galaxy where peace was held together by the threat of mutually assured destruction, that made them suspicious. No one could be that soft, that trusting, that naive. Surely they had something. A secret fleet, a hidden program. But decades passed, and still nothing. No weapon demonstrations, no show of force parades, no strategic deterrence. Earth attended every summit, signed every peace accord, and left without a single demand. Some saw it as a strength, others a dangerous gamble. One Zanari admiral said it best. Either the humans are fools, or they're waiting for a reason. But the reason never came, because humanity didn't rise to power like the others. They didn't conquer. They cooperated. They weren't feared. They were liked. And somehow, that was more unsettling, because every other species had shown what they were willing to do to survive. But humans? Humans had only shown what they were willing to share. The council welcomed them, invited them to the high seats, gave them a voice, and humanity used it gently, always gently. When tensions rose between old rivals, it was a Terran diplomat who calmed the room. When a trade war threatened a sector, Earth offered compromise, one that somehow satisfied both sides. But still no fleet, no military contribution. Whenever asked about it, their response was always the same. We have nothing to fear. And maybe they meant it, or maybe they meant something else. The kind of confidence that isn't born of peace, but of certainty, because deep in the quiet places of Earth, behind the embassies and scientific exchanges, something else was happening. Something no one saw, or bothered to look for. Because why would they? The humans had no warships, and that made them harmless, didn't it? Peace is a fragile thing. Even in a galaxy ruled by logic and treaties and shared economics, it only takes one spark to test everything. And this time, the spark came from the outer reach. A skirmish at first, a border dispute between minor powers. Then it spread. Trade convoys attacked, stations raided, weapons found in places they shouldn't be. Pirate activity spiked across 4 sectors. But these weren't the usual rogues. They were coordinated, armed too well, striking too precisely. Someone was feeding them, and whoever it was wanted a war. The council convened an emergency session. Every species brought their own plans. Fleet repositioning, sector lockdowns, high alert protocols, and for the first time in decades, joint military deployment, a defensive show of unity. They called it a stabilization armada. Each major power was to contribute warships, heavy class, flagged, armed, a message not just to pirates, but to anyone watching. And Earth was asked to contribute, formally, publicly, not aid, not relief. Firepower. The council chambers waited. The request was clear. For once, Earth would have to show what it had. No more ambiguity. No more gentle diplomacy. The threat was real. The Armada was forming. And Earth had a seat at the table. They had to act. But the humans didn't speak. They didn't vote. They simply acknowledged receipt of the request and went silent. The council assumed delay. Maybe internal debate. Maybe shame. But no explanation came. Not the next day. Not the next week. Then, 2 days before the Armada's assembly. A signal. Not a message. Not a voice. Just coordinates. One set. In deep space. Unoccupied. Unaligned. The council flagged it as an error. A miscommunication. But the humans confirmed. Yes, those were the coordinates. Yes, they were contributing a ship. Yes, it would arrive there. No other details. The council pressed. They wanted to know what class of vessel, what support it would require, what armament it would carry. Earth's final reply came through one line of text. It will be sufficient. That was all. No banner, no name, no emblem. Just sufficient. Tension rippled across every delegation. Because suddenly, no one was sure what Earth meant. Did they build a fleet after all? Did they have hidden weapon caches? Was this the reveal? Speculation consumed the chambers. Old reports were reanalyzed. Sensor records combed. Rumors surfaced of Terran shipyards beyond mapped systems, silent for years. A few dismissed it as theater. Earth had always been eccentric. Maybe this was more of the same. But those who had served with Terran engineers, those who remembered the human refusal to build public fleets, they said nothing. They just waited. And when the day came, when the Armada formed in orbit around the rendezvous world, warships lined up in perfect formation. The humans did not speak. They did not hail. They did not explain. But something began to appear in the distance. It didn't warp in. It didn't jump. It just became visible, as if it had always been there. Waiting, watching, a single vessel, dark, silent, moving with impossible precision. No registration, no signal, just a shape against the stars. And suddenly, every sensor on every ship failed, not offline, not disrupted, blinded, for exactly 60 seconds. When they recovered, the Terran vessel was in position, perfectly aligned, silent. Still, the humans had sent a warship. Just one, but it was enough. Because in that moment, no one cared how many ships Earth had. They only cared about the one that had just arrived. It was impossible to ignore. Even among the Armada, a fleet of the most advanced warships ever assembled, the Terran ship stood apart. Not because of its size, not because of its power signatures, but because of how it felt. It didn't announce itself, didn't flash navigation lights, didn't transmit welcome codes. It simply moved into formation and held position. No escort, no support fleet, just one vessel. And somehow that was worse, because no one knew how to categorize it. It didn't match any known silhouette. No blueprint, no registry, not even an echo in the black market ship trading forums. It was new, unclassified, and it was massive, twice the length of the largest dreadnought present. But sleek, seamless, no obvious propulsion arrays, no weapon mounts, no visible shield generators. Just a dark hull that absorbed light, black but not matte. It shimmered faintly, like it was breathing. The other ships drifted slightly, recalibrating automatically. Every targeting system registered it, then failed to lock. Not jammed, not blocked, just refused, as if the ship wasn't there at all. Commanders aboard the Armada vessels began transmitting questions. To Earth, to the ship, to each other. No answer. The Terran ship remained still, not in hiding, in position, because wherever it had been built, whatever its origin, this vessel knew exactly where it belonged. And it wasn't here to explain itself. It was here to be seen. Some officers tried to scan it. Most regretted it. Data returned corrupted. Sensor arrays overloaded. One ship had to reboot entirely. The silence from Earth continued. No public address. No clarification. Just a ship. It hung there, quietly, unblinking, like a fact too large to understand. The tension rose. Among the Armada commanders. Among the Council. Even among the civilians watching through open media channels. Because now the story was changing. This wasn't just about a ship. It was about what it meant. For decades, Earth had smiled, helped, cooperated. They had played the role of the pacifist, the gentle mediator, the voice of restraint. And all the while they were building this. Not for conquest, not for display, but for this exact moment. The moment when the galaxy looked to them for strength. And they delivered a silence that could not be challenged. One veteran fleet commander finally said what others wouldn't. That's not a warship. That's a line in the sand. Still, some doubted. They argued it could be a bluff, a vessel meant for defense, an overbuilt command ship. But they didn't say it loudly, and they didn't say it near their targeting officers, because no one wanted to know what would happen if that ship ever moved. And it didn't. It didn't twitch, didn't reposition, didn't even acknowledge the gathering around it, because it didn't need to. It was there. That was enough. One of the council aides, a young translator from a minor trade species, whispered the words now spreading in every chamber. They didn't bring it to win a war. They brought it so we wouldn't start one. And in the stillness of deep space, surrounded by hundreds of warships from every corner of the galaxy, the Terran ship said nothing. And yet, somehow, it spoke louder than anything that had come before it. No one could get close. Not physically, not technically. The Terran warship maintained a passive field around its hull. Nothing aggressive, nothing stated. But every ship that approached within 1,000 kilometers drifted off course, just slightly, just enough to keep them from touching. And every drone stopped functioning. No fire, no damage, just off. The Armada's sensor arrays couldn't penetrate the hull. Its mass readings changed depending on angle. Its surface temperature wasn't consistent, as if it was simulating different outputs at different points. That wasn't shielding. That wasn't stealth. That was intentional design. So the questions started piling up. What was it made of? Where was it built? How had Earth hidden something that size? And most of all, how long had they been building it? The first rumors came from a retired engineer, a civilian, someone who'd worked on a classified orbital project near Saturn 40 years ago. They said the ship had no name then, just a designation, no shape, no final blueprint, only one instruction passed down from the top. Whatever you build, make sure it lasts longer than we do. The fragments began to form a picture. This ship hadn't been rushed. It hadn't been built as a reaction. It was a foundation, a vessel not for war, but for the memory of it. Decades of construction, in secret, in silence. Every Terran system contributing in small pieces. No one project large enough to notice. No single component marked military. Just quiet, constant effort, buried inside a species that had survived more than the galaxy would ever know. Some experts began calling it impossible. The material alone couldn't exist. The energy outputs were unreadable. Its systems were too stable. One Zorlani engineer, after reviewing the scattered data, finally said, "If we had 10 of our best shipyards in 1,000 years, we could not build this. Because we would ask how. The humans never asked how. They asked why. And that is harder to answer. It wasn't just a ship. It was philosophy in metal. The lines of the hull had no seams, no access points, no visible weak spots. The surface was matte black until it moved slightly and caught the light, revealing subtle patterns. Etchings, not decoration. Names, thousands of them. Tiny, perfect lettering, unreadable from a distance, but unmistakably human. Engineers, designers, test pilots, historians, survivors, victims. Because this ship had not been built for glory. It had been built to remember. A floating monument wrapped around a core of unflinching resolve. And now, it sat in formation with the Armada. Silent, still, sufficient. One species asked Earth directly, "What do you call it?" Earth answered with just 2 words, vigilant silence. And when asked why they built it, why they had hidden it for so long, the answer came not in another message, not in a speech, but in the continued stillness of the warship. Because humans had built a vessel not to speak for them, but to stand in place of explanation. And everyone watching began to understand. This ship wasn't just a deterrent. It was a message, not to the pirates, not to the rival powers, to the galaxy itself. We are peaceful, but not because we are weak, because we remember what happens when we are not. The rumors never stopped. Everyone wanted to know why Earth built the warship, and no one could agree. Some said it was fear, an old paranoia finally taking shape. Others whispered about a hidden threat, something only the humans knew. Some insisted it was meant for control, but they were all wrong, because they assumed the vigilant silence was a weapon. It wasn't. It was a memory, and that made it far more dangerous. It began with fragments, pieces of history shared through back channels, old Terran records, declassified transmissions, survivor accounts from the time before Earth joined the Council. Stories most had never heard, because most had never asked. They spoke of fires in the sky, of bombs that erased cities, of wars fought on their own soil, again and again. Not over resources, not for expansion, but because humans couldn't agree not to destroy each other. World wars, civil wars, cold wars that nearly burned hot. One conflict lasted so long they forgot why it started. Another ended only after entire continents were scarred. And through it all, through every betrayal, every failure of leadership, every collapse of hope, humanity survived. But they never forgot. They buried it, pushed it down, focused on healing. But beneath every act of diplomacy, every peaceful gesture, every smile in council chambers, there was memory of what they had been, of how close they had come to vanishing, and what it had cost to step away from the edge. The vigilant silence was not born in fear. It was born in remembrance. It was not built to conquer. It was built to remind. Every alloy, every panel, every inch of hull carried a name. Not of generals, of victims, not of wars won, of lessons learned too late. The ship did not have weapons visible, because it did not need to. Its presence was the deterrent. Its silence was the message. And Earth never clarified. They didn't explain the systems, didn't list capabilities, didn't offer a tour. They just let the galaxy look, let them wonder, let them feel what it meant to be seen by something that had walked through hell and returned quietly. Because the vigilant silence didn't carry fire. It carried restraint, and everyone watching it, every admiral, every strategist, every curious observer, came to the same conclusion. This is not the ship you build when you want to fight. This is the ship you build when you never want to fight again. But you're willing to, if you have to. One council historian put it best. She said, every species remembers its victories. Humans remember their failures. And then they build ships from the wreckage. That's what this was. Not a threat, not a boast, a grave marker, a mobile monument to what happens when peace is taken for granted. And the message it carried, without speaking, was simple. We were not always peaceful. We had to learn, and we will not unlearn it just because you forget. So it hovered there, black, still, and ancient by design, born from wars the galaxy never saw, built by hands that once made weapons, now building warnings. Because some species conquer history, others hide from it. But humans? They carry it with them. It was bound to happen. Every gathering has one voice too loud, one hand too quick, one fool too sure. In this case, it was the Kormathi Dominion, a militarized state, young, ambitious, untested in real war. Their ships were sleek, their fleets fast, their admirals eager to prove themselves. They saw the Terran warship, saw the silence, and mistook it for weakness. So they moved. A single Kormathi cruiser detached from the formation. Not close, just close enough. They didn't hail, didn't warn. They fired a warning shot. A pulse beam. Low energy. Not lethal. Not even aimed at the hull. Just close. A message. The beam arced across the vacuum. Brilliant white. Passing within 10 kilometers of the vigilant silence. And the moment it reached that point, it vanished. Not exploded. Not deflected. Not absorbed. Gone. As if space itself had blinked. Silence followed. The Kormathi cruiser held position, waiting for response. None came. The vigilant silence didn't shift. Didn't activate defenses. Didn't so much as warm a circuit. It just remained. And that made it worse. The Dominion, embarrassed, ordered another pass. This time they armed weapons systems. Just posture, they said. Just a second layer of intimidation. but they never got the chance to fire. Because every system on the Kormathi cruiser, every light, every screen, every thruster, shut down, mid-flight, dead quiet, no explosion, no EMP pulse, no alarm, just silence. The ship didn't drift, didn't fall. It stopped, held perfectly in place. Then, slowly, impossibly, turned, not under its own power, turned to face the vigilant silence. And then the lights came back on, not all at once. First, the internal systems, then the engines, then the comms. A panicked voice crackled over the fleet-wide channel. We lost control. The ship, someone else, no one. Static, then silence again. A minute passed, two. Then the ship powered down one last time. This time, permanently. Rescue crews arrived hours later, broke through manually, found the crew inside, alive but unconscious. Every single one. Vitals normal. No signs of harm. But they would not wake. Not for days. And when they did, they didn't speak of what happened. They couldn't. Every attempt triggered panic. One began screaming. Another sobbed. One simply whispered. It looked at me. No physical damage. No chemical traces. No known interference. Just a warship that had done nothing and left a mark no scan could detect. The Kormathi government tried to recover. Blustered. Demanded explanation. Earth never responded. But the Kormathi cruiser? It was left where it drifted, still facing the vigilant silence. Its hull now bore one addition, etched with microscopic precision, deep enough to be seen, faintly, by passing patrols. 7 words. Do not wake what you do not understand. No more challenges followed. No more tests. The council made no official statement. But the message spread faster than any broadcast. This was not a ship you questioned, not a vessel to provoke. Because the vigilant silence had shown the galaxy exactly what it was capable of. Nothing. And that nothing was enough. No one expected a response. Earth had remained quiet through everything. The Armada's formation, the questions, the challenge, even the Kormathi incident. They had said nothing. The vigilant silence had said nothing. And somehow, that silence had done more than any weapon ever could. So when the transmission came, no warning, no encryption, it stopped everything. No image, no music, just a voice. Human, calm, measured, tired. The voice of someone who had carried something heavy for a very long time. And now, finally, was willing to let others feel its weight. We are not here to intimidate. It began simply. We did not send this ship as a show of force. We sent it so you would stop asking us if we have one. There was no arrogance, no anger. Only a kind of clarity that silenced every room it reached. For decades, we listened. We cooperated. We helped where we could. We asked for nothing. And still we were watched. Not with trust, but with doubt. You wondered if we had teeth, if we had weapons, if we had the will to defend what we love. The voice paused. Let the silence sit. Then continued. We do. That was it. That single sentence hit harder than any demonstration could have. But the message wasn't over. We built the vigilant silence not to start a war. We built it so that we would never be the ones who forgot what war costs. Every system, every bolt, every hour spent in secret construction wasn't about fear. It was about memory. We did not build a warship. We built a promise. To ourselves, to each other, and now to you. The voice softened, not in tone but in gravity. This ship will never fire first. But it will always be ready, because peace is not made with trust alone. Peace is kept with understanding. And we want you to understand something clearly. We remember what was done to us. We do not forget. There was no closing signature, no name, no identity, no anthem, just silence again. And somehow, that said the rest. For the next several hours, nothing moved. Not the fleet, not the diplomats, not even the message archives. Every council species reviewed the transmission, over and over, parsed every word, measured the tone, listened not just to what was said, but what was not. And they understood. The vigilant silence wasn't a threat. It wasn't a message to pirates, or rivals, or challengers. It was a reminder to the galaxy itself. Earth's kindness had never been weakness. It was discipline. And this ship? This ship was what that discipline looked like when enough had been enough. One council member, a seasoned diplomat from a former rival species, stood and spoke to a silent chamber. We should be grateful they only built one. And no one disagreed. No one expected a response. Earth had remained quiet through everything. The Armada's formation, the questions, the challenge, even the Kormothi incident. They had said nothing. The vigilant silence had said nothing. And somehow, that silence had done more than any weapon ever could. So when the transmission came, no warning, no encryption, it stopped everything. No image, no music, just a voice. Human, calm, measured, tired. The voice of someone who had carried something heavy for a very long time. And now, finally, was willing to let others feel its weight. We are not here to intimidate. It began simply. We did not send this ship as a show of force. We sent it so you would stop asking us if we have one. There was no arrogance, no anger, only a kind of clarity that silenced every room it reached. For decades, we listened. We cooperated. We helped where we could. We asked for nothing. And still we were watched. Not with trust, but with doubt. You wondered if we had teeth, if we had weapons, if we had the will to defend what we love. The voice paused. Let the silence sit. Then continued. We do. That was it. That single sentence hit harder than any demonstration could have. But the message wasn't over. We built the vigilant silence not to start a war. We built it so that we would never be the ones who forgot what were costs. Every system, every bolt, every hour spent in secret construction wasn't about fear. It was about memory. We did not build a warship. We built a promise. To ourselves, to each other, and now to you. The voice softened, not in tone, but in gravity. This ship will never fire first, but it will always be ready. Because peace is not made with trust alone. Peace is kept with understanding. And we want you to understand something clearly. We remember what was done to us. We do not forget. There was no closing signature, no name, no identity, no anthem, just silence again. And somehow, that said the rest. For the next several hours, nothing moved. Not the fleet, not the diplomats, not even a message archives. Every council species reviewed the transmission, over and over, parsed every word, measured the tone, listened not just to what was said, but what was not. And they understood. The vigilant silence wasn't a threat. It wasn't a message to pirates, or rivals, or challengers. It was a reminder to the galaxy itself. Earth's kindness had never been weakness. It was discipline. And this ship was what that discipline looked like when enough had been enough. One council member, a seasoned diplomat from a former rival species, stood and spoke to a silent chamber. We should be grateful they only built one. And no one disagreed. Let me know when you're ready for the final section. Section 8, A New Balance, where the galaxy settles into an uneasy peace, not because of treaties, but because now humanity is watching. You said, next. ChatGPT said, here is Section 8, A New Balance, the final chapter. No declarations, no demands, no more questions, because peace is returned. But this time, everyone knows what stands behind it. Section 8, A New Balance. 500 characters. The war never came. Despite the fears, despite the build-up, despite the tension so thick it made the stars feel heavier. No shots were fired. No fleets mobilized. No borders crossed. Because peace, for once, was not held by threats, or promises, or paperwork. It was held by presence. The vigilant silence remained exactly where it had arrived, unchanged, unmoved, unshaken. It never spoke again. It didn't need to, because after that voice, after that message, something shifted across the galaxy, in trade routes, in defense agreements, in how species looked at each other. They remembered the voice. They remembered the warning. And they remembered the ship that didn't blink when challenged. A new kind of balance formed. Not enforced by fleets, but by memory. Earth returned to its usual position in council proceedings. Soft-spoken, reasoned, polite, just as before. But now, when they spoke, no one interrupted. When they voted, others listened. When they voiced caution, old empires hesitated. Because now, the galaxy understood something that had been true all along. Humanity didn't need a fleet. They needed one ship to say what words never could, that they could build monsters, but chose not to, that they remembered every scar and carried every name, not to justify war, but to prevent it. The vigilant silence became more than a deterrent. It became a symbol of restraint, of warning, of a species that had nearly destroyed itself, and then made sure it would never let that happen again. Years passed. Threats came and went. New species emerged. Old powers faded, but the vigilant silence remained. Sometimes it would move, quietly, without fanfare, from one system to another. Always alone, not patrolling, not responding, just watching. Its presence alone ended standoffs, calmed rising tensions, stopped wars before they began. And Earth never said what it was doing, because they didn't need to. One observer wrote, "The humans didn't bring peace. They reminded us what happens when we forget why we needed it." The Council archives eventually updated the record, not with blueprints, not with statistics, but with one entry, placed quietly at the top of the Terran military file. Vigilant silence, not built to dominate, built to endure, not a threat, a memory, and a choice. There were debates over whether Earth should be required to disclose more, disarm, submit the ship to inspection. But every time that debate came up, the chamber went quiet, because no one wanted to know what it would take for that ship to finally move. And none of them wanted to be the reason. Peace held, not out of fear, out of understanding, that humanity had already fought its last war. And what came out the other side was not a race of warriors, but a species of witnesses. They had built their warship out of restraint, carried their past into the stars. And now, that past hung in orbit above the galaxy. A promise, unspoken, unbroken, final line, still grave final. The vigilant silence never fired a shot. It didn't have to, because the galaxy finally understood. Humanity doesn't build weapons to win wars. They build them so they don't have to fight them again.